This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. For the last few years, avian influenza has ravaged flocks of birds in the U.S. In Missouri alone, more than 5 million birds have been affected since 2022, and the disease has begun to spread beyond poultry and waterfowl to dairy cows and other mammals. Engineers at Washington University in St. Louis have created a device that can detect bird flu particles in real time, but producing more of these biosensors faces serious challenges. STLPR health reporter Sarah Fentem joins us now to talk about that. Sarah, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Elaine.
So, Sarah, we've heard a lot about bird flu in the past months. But before we talk about this new device, what are the need-to-knows about the current avian flu outbreak?
I think one of the first things to say is that currently we're not seeing it spread from human to human, even though we are seeing rare cases in humans. But this particular outbreak has been going on for years at this point, since 2022. And although it's circulated among wild and commercial animals for decades, what's concerning people is not only sort of the scope of this outbreak, but the fact that we're seeing more animals that aren't birds being infected. And so, we've heard about, obviously, dairy cows, but also reports of foxes, cats, other mammals being infected. And that has some scientists a little wary. They're on the lookout. And what I keep hearing from people say is that they're keeping an eye on it and seeing what happens in the next few months.
Mm-hmm. Now, the scope of this outbreak, you have had an opportunity to talk with a number of people about this. Tell me what you've been hearing from them.
The scope of the outbreak in Missouri, at least, is, millions of birds have been affected. And what affected means is that those birds are on a property where bird flu has been found. In Missouri, that's in the southwestern part of the state, kind of around Springfield area. But what happens and the effect of that is when bird flu is found, the way that's very common to contain it is you have to cull your flocks, which basically means killing all the birds that could be infected. And we've seen that obviously have big effects on consumer prices, particularly for eggs. If you tried to make an omelet lately,
right.
It's a kind of expensive thing. And so that's, what's happening is we're seeing this reach its fingers into a lot of different states and industries, not only eggs, but also poultry and chicken, meat, birds as well.
Yeah. So one of the people that you spoke with is a poultry extension specialist. Tell me about what you heard.
Right. Last week, I talked to Tatiana Fisher, who is the state poultry extension specialist at Lincoln University. That's in Jefferson City, Missouri.
We've seen a number of different species that are impacted, wild species as well as domestic. And that's been what's super unique and kind of scary about this particular outbreak. It is the longest lasting avian influenza outbreak in the U.S. It's the largest in terms of number of birds impacted.
What was it that stood out to you about what you talked about with Tatiana?
I think one of the interesting things about this particular virus is right now, people are saying don't panic. And I think that especially because we're looking at a flu and in humans, it's not, flu is for the most part it's preventable with vaccines. But the fact that this is circulating so much, particularly in mammals, and what we saw in the coronavirus pandemic is that the more virus circulates, the more chance it has to sort of develop and become more friendly with mammals and people. And so that's what scientists are currently keeping an eye out right now for, is the more this spreads, the more it develops and the bigger there is a risk to non-avian animals.
So getting a handle on where there's avian influenza, and getting confirmation that it is actually there is really key to getting a handle on this outbreak. And there's been some timely development around that right here in St. Louis. Sarah, tell us about the microwave-sized biosensor that's been created.
Right. So this is cool. It is It literally looks like a mini fridge, and some engineers at WashU have developed it. And it uses something called wet cyclone technology, which, if it sounds familiar, it's because people have also been developing this to test for coronavirus particles in the air. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it sucks in air really fast and it swirls it around in a liquid. And that liquid reacts to substances inside of the machine. And when it finds certain particles, it issues an alert to the operator of the machine. And so they've kind of made this technology so that it can detect H5N1, which is the bird flu. And the inventors say that's really important because when you know where bird flu is, you can contain it, and you can avoid having to do that big mass killing off of birds. Mm-hmm. And so one of the developers is Rajan Chakrabarty. He's an engineering professor at WashU, and people in his lab developed the device.
There is a need to come up with real-time testing of this flu encapsulated in droplets and aerosols floating in air in facilities, among people who work in animal facilities, and it's almost like the first line of defense, where you get a rough estimate, a qualitative estimate of if at all there is any virus present, and if yes, that particular area where this virus has been detected can be protected, can be just blocked off, and the samples collected could be sent for more in detail or in-depth testing.
And that's Rajan Chakrabarty, who is the engineering professor at WashU, who's one of the people who's created this device. Mm-hmm. So Sarah, can you give me a sense of, what you were getting from Chakrabarty as he was describing why this technology is so important right now?
Right. And again, it comes down to being able to have early detection. One of the problems, though, is that this is where we see a lot of news stories coming together, is that a lot of this kind of research is made possible through federal funding. Mm-hmm. And Chakrabarty is a little bit less confident that to sort of commercialize this machine and get it over the finish line, that they will have federal funding in order to do that.
Mm-hmm. And how optimistic does he seem that he'll be able to procure, private funding or philanthropic money in order to scale up?
Well, what he told me when I talked to him yesterday was that he's looking at sort of, philanthropic funders, which is what I think a lot of researchers are kind of thinking about right now, because all of these federal dollars, these federal agencies are being slashed, and it's unclear what will happen in the future. Just like with bird flu, there's a lot of stuff that's up in the air, and all of these news stories are coming together to create some uncertainty in the research field right now.
Sarah Fentem is STLPR's health reporter. Sarah, thanks so much for talking with us today.
Anytime.
This episode was produced by Emily Woodbury.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see Time is of the essence.
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.